Yeah. No, I love that. Well, let's stick with that because I think we're advocating for like a mixed media approach to the art of investing for systems change. Yeah, so basically, I started doing research on sustainability oriented innovation. Like, how do we build companies like the ones my parents were building that try to simultaneously solve a public problem and a private problem? And what I, as I was looking at who was financing companies like that, I sort of came upon the impact investing world, and the important role that families and private wealth play in the impact investing arena. And so for the last 8 years or so, I've had various engagements with um, just family offices and high net worth families who are trying to do impact, who can be have the flexibility to be very intentional about capital deployment because they don't have the fiduciary constraints of some of the institutional investors. And we tied up with the CSP out of Zurich that does a great program for next gens. We tied up with John Davis, who came here to Sloan to run programs on family enterprise. And it put me into that whole world. And what I noticed was that the people who had really been doing impact investing for a while um, were bumping up against a kind of frustration. And it was that, to use your metaphor, they were sort of running up against the limits of what they could depict with just charcoal or just a pencil set. Which is that, as one investor said to us, look, we were out to work on the food problem, right? The huge impact on the environment that our food system has, the huge inequities in the food system. We got to tackle this. And so we got involved as investors. And the way we saw we could have additive impact was to invest in early stage companies as a equity investor. So we became kind of venture capitalists. And that was in a sense you could think of as like one color in your palette or one tool in your artistic toolbox. And they said, and we kind of won that game, right? We were early investors in Beyond Meat. It went IPO. We made a lot of money. But at the end of the day, it's like another product in the freezer section of the same grocery stores, and they're battling it out among, Beyond Meat versus Impossible when the rest of the food system sort of stays intact. So we didn't change the food system. So what would it look like if we were investing to change the food system? So we were running into that conversation. And then simultaneously, we were engaging with institutional investors like pension funds and others to improve the quality of ESG measurement. We have a whole project here called the Aggregate Confusion Project, which is about improving measurement. And as we found our way to some of the most forward-thinking, progressive kind of institutional investors, they were also running into this kind of systems perspective. They were saying, look, a lot of this ESG stuff is about trying to mitigate these idiosyncratic risks between company A being marginally better than company B. But actually, like the big ESG stuff is the systemic risks. Like we all face massive risks due to climate change, due to inequality, due to biodiversity loss that are going to affect our portfolios as a whole. And we can't diversify away from those risks. And so we somehow have to take them on. And we can be active stewards to try to improve things and to try to make change. But just as we recognize these are systemic risks, we have to think about how do we make systemic change, because we're used to like shareholder campaigns that are like one company at a time. So those two conversations evolved to become the one that's emerged out of kind of more the private wealth impact investing arena evolved to become the conversation about systemic investing or investing for systems change. Was sort of the language that they were using, because there was this strong intentionality to say, like, we want to invest for systems change. And then in the institutional investors, they were more comfortable with this language that Steve Leidenberg and Will Burkhart had put out around systems level investing. Like we want to be thinking at the systems level as we do our action as investors. But in a sense, I think these things end up converging, because at the end of the day, if you want to take action to mitigate a systemic risk, you got to learn how to use your influence to drive systems change. And so you become a systemic investor or an investor for system change. So we just sort of, noticed that this conversation was emerging, and we said, hey, look, like we're at MIT Sloan, right? This is the birthplace of system dynamics, the systems thinking perspectives that Peter Senge and Otto Scharmer had advanced after having built off of what Jay Forrester and Dennis Meadows and Donell Meadows and John Sterman had built. And we know something about sustainable finance because of this work we're doing in aggregate confusion, and we know about families. So we're probably a reasonably good place to explore these questions and start looking seriously at this topic of investing in systems change. So that has propelled the creation of a whole project under our umbrella that's called the Owning Impact Project, which I'm leading, and which is trying to help advance the theory and practice of systemic investing. So that, and I'll come back to your metaphors here, right? So that the various and in along the way, what people have been telling us is, okay, look, we were doing our impact investing through, it wasn't always through venture. It might be through, low cost financing of homes in low income areas, or other micro lending and financial inclusion type plays. But we were bumping up against like the limits of that. So the question people have been asking is like, how can we invest across asset classes, including philanthropy, in ways that are synergistic with each other to produce bigger outcomes than we could with just one of these tools? So how can we have a richer color palette and make a more beautiful tapestry of activity, to use your metaphor?